Hey everyone, this is Dr. Casey Johnson. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to the Unlock Wellness podcast. I know you're going to love today's episode with Matt Lancor. Matt is doing some amazing work, so I'm excited to have him on to share a story with you guys. If you've been loving the Unlock Wellness podcast, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Also, be sure to follow me on social media to keep up with the latest podcast episodes. The best way to connect with me is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. My username across the board is at Dr. Casey Johnson. That's DrKaseyJohnson. You can also check out my website at drkaseyjohnson.com. It has all of the past podcast episodes and more information about each guest under the Listen tab. While you're on my site, also be sure to check out the Shop tab, where you can check out my first book of my Healthy Children's Book series. Thank you again for listening. I hope this episode leaves you feeling inspired to start making positive changes to your health. Now it's time for today's episode. I hope you love my conversation with Matt Lancor. Welcome to the Unlock Wellness podcast. I'm Dr. Casey and excited for today's guest. I'm here with Matt Lancor. And Matt is founder of the kombucha company, Kombuchade. If you know me or have listened to this podcast long enough, you know that I am obsessed with kombucha. I drink it most days of the week for like the past 6 years. I just think it's amazing. So I'm excited to dive into Matt's backstory, talk about the process of creating a kombucha company, as well as the incredible health benefits that drinking kombucha has. So Matt, just thank you so much for taking time to come on. I'm excited to have you.
Yes, no worries. Anyone who's interested in kombucha, I'm always down to make some time to talk about.
All right, Matt. So, before we dive into all of the work that you're doing with Kombuchade, let's start with your backstory. First off, where you're from and what your own health and wellness journey has been like for you. What your health and wellness looked like just growing up as a kid.
Totally. So I grew up in the southwest suburbs, a town called Plainfield, Illinois. I wouldn't say I had really any significant health and wellness challenges growing up. My mom always cooked a lot of meals at home. She told us not to take too much Advil because it could hurt our livers. So I would say we were on the healthier end of things when I was younger. Certainly some room to improve, but my mom was above average.
That's awesome, though. I mean, that's cool that she had the awareness, because a lot of, people didn't know that. I mean, a lot of people still don't know that, especially with like Advil and things like that.
Oh, totally. We used to think she was a little weird, but as the years have come along, we realized that she knew what she was doing all along.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, that's really cool. So, and you played sports growing up too as well, right?
Yeah, that's, not having any significant health and wellness challenges. What really got me into this was kind of a performance enhancement interest for my rugby career.
Gotcha. So when did you actually discover kombucha? Because, rugby played a huge part in it, right? So how did you really discover it? Did it really help with your performance at a young age, like in high school, or was it college?
Yeah, it was rooted certainly in just being a competitive athlete my whole life. Growing up, I played soccer up until middle school when I got into football. And then in high school, I was playing football. I wrestled in the winter. And then I would play rugby in the spring. And after graduating, I had gotten accepted into the engineering program down at the University of Illinois. And there was a burgeoning kind of Big Ten rugby scene that was popping up. And so, these two interests of mine kind of came together. And actually, after I've looked back on it, there was a chemical engineering friend of mine that was on the rugby team. And we were trying to come up with some kind of smoothie or some kind of juice that was going to help us with our rugby game back when we lived in the rugby house my junior year. It was like this search for, things that could exponentially help you, things that would taste good, that didn't really take a lot of effort to implement.
Got it. So where does kombucha fall in all of this? Because you're trying to find something to help. You're not really sure what it is. Like, did somebody introduce it to you, or did you find it just randomly by chance?
So I was out in, after I graduated, I started playing with a team called the Chicago Lions, and we'd made it to the national championship that was played out in Seattle. So it's the top 16 teams in the country there for a 2-day tournament. And I was out grocery shopping looking for snacks for the weekend. And that's when I came across an end cap that had a bunch of GT's kombucha on it. And like I said, I kind of had this seed in the back of my head that we were kind of looking for something that was, healthier, that would taste good and kind of help for training. And I started reading the label, and it had probiotics and vitamin B and spirulina. And I kind of joked to myself, I was like, well, if this doesn't taste like shit, this is probably exactly what we're looking for.
So obviously you did love it, or we wouldn't be here today, right? So, I mean, what immediate effects did you notice just by starting to implement it more and more?
I would say the simplest way to describe it was I felt like it was helping me digest my food and absorb the nutrients, turn those into energy, and then detox the wastes out of my body. And it was this kind of idea of, the human body being a fermentation system of food goes into the body. It goes into a heated container, the stomach, that has bacteria and yeast in there. And over time it ferments and there's byproducts that come out of it. And I felt like kombucha was just speeding up this kind of human fermentation process for me.
Right. And I mean, not to mention, I know, I follow you guys on Instagram. I know you guys put out the history as well. But I mean, kombucha has been around for such a long time. I mean, how long, Matt, is the exact number? Do you know right off?
So the leading scientist in this realm, her name is Hannah Crum, and she's the head of the Kombucha Brewers International Association. And she has said that there's record of at least over 2,000 years ago that kombucha was being brewed in somewhere either in East Asia or Russia.
No, that's super interesting. After you decided that you liked how it tastes, it was making you feel healthier, you really felt like it was putting your body, just right on the right track, just moving in the right direction. I know that you really got into home brewing. So how did that kind of lead up to that?
Yeah, that was kind of as soon as I got home, it was kind of hard to find in my area, actually. And I remember finding a single grocery store that had a couple different GT's flavors. And I just started buying probably 5 or 6 bottles at a time. And I was drinking probably one a day or one every 2 days and just feeling good. I just felt like all of a sudden there was, what I thought to be a baseline of health. And I was, I had an extra 10% or, whatever we want to call it.
And then from that point, you decided to homebrew just to kind of test it out for yourself. I mean, with your engineering background, that's probably second nature for you, right? Just to mess with the variables and see what you can actually create.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I loved about it was, it comes down to a few simple parameters. It's tea. You need time. There's a temperature component to it. And then you add an energy source, some type of sugar for the fermentation power. And there's all these variables, but there was all this functionality that I could think about. If you look at the different functions of different types of teas and herbs, I immediately started thinking about how could I formulate, a superhuman beverage. I was seeing kombucha as more of a medium, for these functional teas and herbs than as an end goal.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, there are so many variables, like you mentioned. You could use different types of tea, whether it's black tea or green tea or oolong or whatever type of tea you want to go with. I mean, like you were talking about the temperature and then the fermentation time, like literally affects every aspect of it. Because if you're fermenting for a short amount of time, it's going to be a little bit more sweet, whether it's longer and it's going to be more vinegary, and like alcohol percent goes up if you leave it for a certain amounts of time, and you have all of those things, plus you could flavor it, right? So, and I'm sure there's mistakes made in those early stages as well. I haven't done it in a while. I took a little break for a bit, But the first homebrew that I did, Matt, like I was so excited, and I didn't know to keep it. Like I put it in like a cupboard that didn't have very much airflow, and it was like molded day 3. And I was so upset. I was so sad, but eventually got it down and knew where to put it, so I got enough, airflow and had the right temperature. But yeah, did you mess up any batches in those first few?
What's funny is I had a lot of success early on.
Nice.
And I think it was because when I don't know something, I typically will try to find who knows way more about this than I do. And I mentioned Hannah Crum earlier, and I'm, fortunate that she's also actually from the Chicagoland area. And she also went to the University of Illinois. And so I got a hold of her, and she sent me a recipe. She sent me a tea blend, and she sent me a starter culture. And I just kind of never looked back. I was always like, well, let's just see what can happen.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, that's incredible. You had that kind of support. I know you were just talking about basically what all goes in to kombucha. So you mentioned the tea. You mentioned the sugar, and obviously you have the different variables that you can go with, but every one of them, whether you're home brewing this yourself or whether you're doing this in a brewery, you need a SCOBY. So do you want to go into exactly what a SCOBY is and how it's really affecting the fermentation process and just your body in general?
Totally. The SCOBYs are my favorite. I sometimes joke that I'm just a SCOBY farmer. So a SCOBY is an acronym for a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And they kind of look like a gelatinous pancake or like a jellyfish kind of shape. And it's, cross-linked fibers of the tea plant that harbor a species of bacteria and yeast. And for the most part, what they're doing is consuming energy. So, consuming, in our case, a raw organic cane sugar, and turning those into probiotics, vitamins B and C, and organic acids. One of them really similar to what's found in like apple cider vinegar called glucuronic acid. One of my favorite things about glucuronic acid is that it assists in detoxing fat-soluble toxins. So toxins that can get stuck on fatty tissues or in different parts of the inside of our body. It's a specialist at latching onto those things and getting them out.
No, that is super interesting. I actually didn't know that. I mean, that's amazing. And as far as I know, you were talking about, you do add sugar, but the thing with the fermentation process, I mean, it doesn't matter. It gets rid of basically all of the sugar through the fermentation process, right?
Yeah. So essentially anything that's left over, there is a small amount of residual sugars left over, but for the most part, they've been fermented and broken down, are easily processed by the body. And the only difference between having a small amount of residual sugar is the difference between it tasting like apple cider vinegar or something that may not be palatable.
Right.
So there is like a fine line that you have to walk between, because it's a good question. I mean, I often get asked, like, how do I make a low sugar kombucha? And I tell people, it's not eliminating sugar in the beginning. It's either fermenting at a higher temperature and for a longer period of time. So there's less amounts of residual sugar left over at the end.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's an amazing point to make. So Matt, you started doing this at home. You're brewing it for your family, your teammates, right?
Yeah, that's kind of how it started. I was putting them in half-gallon growlers and selling them to people at my yoga studio, my CrossFit gym, and my rugby team.
Nice. And like, when you were doing that, did you have in the back of your mind that you would eventually make this a business, or was just basically just a test run just to see how it went, but you had a pretty good idea of where it was going to go?
I kind of had a feeling, and now that I look back on it, I just kind of took a few steps at a time. I was in an art class and I drew the logo, and I think I founded the LLC 6 months later. And then towards the end of 2016, I finally made the decision that I was going to go for it. And I told my employer that I was going to be leaving at the end of the year.
That's awesome. No, I do love the name, by the way. I think it's super creative. So once you put in that work notice and you started to taking those steps to officially go all out, like what did you do from there? Like what was the process of really starting a kombucha company? Because a lot of people don't know what that looks like. I mean, it actually is, it is a brewery. Like you have to have that set up. It has to have certain conditions. So how was the process of finding the space? How difficult was it with laws and regulation? And we can kind of talk about that in more detail in a second, but just how was that whole process?
No, totally. I mean, it was black market kombucha, like from the start.
That's okay.
Which is, I for a long time, I always felt like the food police were like going to come knock on my door or something. And I just came to realize over time as I started reaching out to mentors and people in the industry who had more experience that that's just how most people start. So obviously the first thing was founding an LLC. I tell all entrepreneurs whenever I do any type of business consulting or anyone comes to me with a business idea, the first thing you're going to do is found your company. So that's whether you're going to start that as a corporation or an LLC or a sole proprietorship. I'm very fortunate to have access to the internet, where a lot of people are asking these same kinds of questions, and just came up with the first steps, one step at a time. Found your LLC, then you talk to the IRS and you get a number, so your federal employee identification number. The next thing I did was I went and opened a business checking account with Chase. Got a business credit card so I could get points for purchasing tea and sugar, and maybe I could buy stuff in a little bit more bulk and save a little bit more money. And then I hooked it up to QuickBooks and kind of got the foundational aspects of the business in place, so that as we were moving forward, I could track things and I could send invoices and I could do things that you needed to have to avoid some headaches down the line.
Right. No, exactly. And as far as like finding a space, how was that process? Did you just find like a place that used to be a brewery, or did you just find just a really good space that was close by and just kind of lucked out?
I caught a lot of breaks, and there's a saying, that if you shake a lot of coconut trees, you're going to find some coconuts.
Right.
And originally I found out that a rugby teammate of mine, his dad owned a catering kitchen in Naperville, which was by my house. And he was doing prepared meals for CrossFit gyms. So we started working under this catering kitchen, doing kombucha and delivering growlers to CrossFit gyms, which kind of got us started. We started getting some feedback from athletes. We were getting return orders. And that's when I started realizing that, we were going to need our own space. And so I started reaching out, and sure enough, caught another break. The only other kombucha brewery in Chicago, Arise Kombucha, had their facility licensed as a wholesale manufacturer, as well as a shared kitchen. So we were able to get a shared kitchen license from the city of Chicago and rent space from another kombucha brewer.
That's awesome. Like that that's amazing that you were able to. that they even had that option available. Obviously makes the process a whole lot easier.
Yeah, it was funny because they had a tenant that was moving out at the end of the month when I spoke with him, and he goes, it's funny, we were just about to start looking for somebody to rent space from us.
So it kind of helps that it's a kombucha company as well then.
Well, yeah, he had water filters, and he had a fermentation room, an isolated room that was held at about 75 to 80 degrees. And so we had a corner in his fermentation room where we brought in all of our own fermentation equipment. And then he had these like 50 liter or, say 10 or 12 gallon electric water kettles. So we could plug them into the wall and make 10 gallon, batches of kombucha at a time. And, it really got us moving. We were able to move in and start making kombucha under a shared kitchen license, within a week. from our move-in day.
Wow. No, that's so amazing. Whenever you're making like a large portion like that, like 10 gallons, are you using multiple scobies or how does that work exactly?
So that was one of the first things I discovered in my research of kombucha, is that there's two different styles of kombucha. One of them is called a batch brewed kombucha, and the other is called a continuous brew. Now, the analogy that I common use is that it's kind of like a quick rise bread versus a sourdough bread, in that the continuous brew, you're going to remove kombucha kind of on a cycle, so say every 7 days, you're going to remove a certain amount of your kombucha, replace it, and then let it sit for another 7 days in a continuous cycle. You have to keep that up every week. You're taking care of it, versus a batch brew where you're going to use, say 10 to 20% of the size of your brew to kickstart a batch. Now, the advantage of that is you don't have to keep it on a cycle. You can kind of start that batch when you have the time to do it, or start that batch when you want some more kombucha.
Gotcha. Does it make it more, like taste wise, does it make it more consistent doing the batch method as opposed to continuous?
I think there's different pros and cons. It's starting to turn into the kombucha industry. I mean, it's becoming like a craft beer of health and wellness.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So everyone's trying out different methods and using different ingredients. And I found that I liked the continuous brew because it yielded something that was a little mellower, which kind of was tying into my want of more of a sports drink than a traditional kombucha.
Gotcha. So do you guys use carbonation at all or not?
So we don't add any carbonation, but we do bottle condition our stuff at room temperature, which gives it like a natural effervescence. So what it'll do is take any of those residual sugars that are left over and start to continue eating them and create carbonation, or we call it like an effervescence.
Got it. No, that's awesome. And like as far as the laws, because I know with kombucha, it's one of those things where it is exploding, but because it is exploding, there's a lot of, they're trying to figure out all the laws with it, right? I know maybe a year or two ago, I know like GT's got in trouble because the longer it sits, like shelf life, the alcohol percent can go up, and then it was actually going up a lot higher than what they reported, and that was a whole issue. So like how has it been just keeping up with the laws of it, making sure it's in that allowable percent, and just dealing with just FDA regulations and things like that?
No, I mean, it's a huge issue in the industry. And it was one of the things that I noticed that a lot of kombucha brewers are using fruit juices or fruit purees to do flavoring and secondary fermentation, which tastes amazing. I mean, I love, a lot of these kombuchas. The challenge you run into is that you're introducing additional sugars, which can kind of, kickstart fermentation again. And so the biggest way you can combat that is to just refrigerate it. So if it's in a refrigerator, the molecules are moving slower and the fermentation process is essentially halted. And so kind of one of the things I wanted to create was, how do I create a kombucha that tastes good without, the need to add some type of fruit juice or fruit puree, which was going to lead to, like you said, additional alcohol challenges. So over time and testing and doing a lot of iterations, we came up with a kombucha that can sit at room temperature for up to 6 months before it's going to reach 0.5% alcohol.
Wow.
At which point it just has to be refrigerated, as it'll halt any of the fermentation process.
No, that's really cool. So you guys don't do second fermentation for flavoring. Like how do you guys go about flavoring then? Or is that secret? Is that the secret sauce?
I mean, it is the secret sauce,
okay.
But we do put all of our ingredients on the labels.
Got it.
So all of our flavoring is coming from dried herbs and teas.
Gotcha. And just so you guys know, and you guys can go check out their website and look at all the ingredients too. And all of the ingredients are amazing. And definitely love what you guys are doing, just keeping everything organic. I think it's amazing too that you guys use fluoride-free water, which I think a lot of companies skip around that. So I, applaud you guys for doing that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, it was definitely it's an extra purchase. I mean, when you look at our water filter, there's a whole extra unit dedicated to removing that molecule. And, a lot of people have different viewpoints on it. But, I wanted the cleanest water available, and it's a personal, thing that I believe in, that I don't want fluoride in my water. And so I wanted to make that available.
Yeah, no, I am with you on that. And yeah, I need to do a fluoride-based episode. Again, like Matt's saying, I'm sure he can agree with me. You guys, if learning about like fluoride and the questions with that and why we don't want to consume it, if that's new to you, definitely encourage you guys to go dive into the research of that, jump onto Google, start going through different resources available, because it is a big problem. And I think once you start to dive in, you might be very surprised on what you find with that, because it's very serious. But back to the laws, Matt, for a second. So because you have developed it so it can sit for so long without messing with that percent, did you guys have any issues with like shipping? Because I know that that's a big problem too. It's like, are you shipping alcohol or not? Because I know some states don't allow that. So have you had any issues with like shipping at all? Or has that been pretty good since you guys have been able to show that that percent can be maintained for such a long time?
Yeah, I honestly believe that's probably one of our biggest advantages at the moment is, I can package this kombucha on a Wednesday and ship it out, a week later, and there's no chance that kombucha is going to reach 0.5% alcohol by the time it gets to the consumer. And so I found these cardboard pulp. They're completely recyclable, and they're made for shipping beer bottles. So we've actually been shipping sample packs around the country for the past couple months now.
That's awesome. Are you guys planning to expand at all? I mean, like further out than Chicago?
Yeah, at the moment we're in a great spot in Chicago. We're in a really cool building that's called The Plant, and it's a 90,000 square foot old meat packing plant that's been repurposed as a sustainable food business incubator.
That's really cool. I mean, like as far as like getting it to, because you guys right now, it's not available like everywhere, right? Like it's not like through Whole Foods or different places like that quite yet.
No, so at the moment we're focusing on independent retailers in the Chicagoland area.
Gotcha.
But on top of that, we're targeting athletes all around the country and shipping bottles directly to people's homes. So we're kind of doing this hyper local but national thing at the same time, kind of looking for what we call our tribe members, our Kombuchade tribe.
You mentioned the recyclable aspect of what you're doing. Like, how important is it to you, or what steps have you taken so far just to embrace the sustainability aspect of it all? Because you are in that like health market, sustainable kind of, category. So are there the steps that you guys want to take as you grow as a company as well to make sure you guys are sustainable as possible?
Yeah, no, it's basically driven by every decision we make. From the beginning, I was only packaging in half-gallon growlers, with the intention that everybody I sold a growler to would bring that glass back to me. At the brewery, we're composting all of our organic waste. Another thing that we haven't really talked about that really does come into sustainability is, eliminating the need for refrigerated inventory and refrigerated delivery is saving us a ton of energy. Now, we also, have sourced out what I believe to be some of the best ingredients. If you're familiar with a tea supplier called Rishi Tea.
I don't think I am. How do you spell that? And I'll check him out.
Mm-hmm. RISHI. And I really like these guys because they're a direct trade tea importer. They're out of Milwaukee, Illinois. So they're Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm sorry, and they can tell you where all of these herbs are coming from. Down to the sometimes the name of the farmer. And there's pictures of these tea leaves being harvested, and I envision the future of the company very much being a seed to bottle type of operation, where we're, very much in touch with what's going on in the supply chain.
That's very cool. How did you get connected with them?
They kept coming up when I was looking for, just the world's best teas. And the fact that they were also based in Milwaukee, being really close to Chicago, tied into, our intentions to do things in the community, to do things as locally as possible when we could.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, that would be really incredible to have that close of a connection with where the tea is coming from. That's huge. Obviously, you will know the qualities there because, I know you understand more than both of us just how, if you don't know where you're getting it from, it's very easy to get low quality tea, just like, low quality coffee is, it's everywhere. So, that's so important in just knowing where those kind of resources are coming from.
Oh, totally. And I saw a lot of dirty food plants in my last job. And so I've seen, how some of these low grade food products are created. And I don't know that if people saw how some of this stuff was made, if they would even eat it.
Do you have any examples that you can legally talk about or no? I'm not trying to get you taken out after this, but
there is a story that I tell when I really kind of knew I was going to leave my job. I was working on a generic brand cheese puff machine, and it looks like a Gatling gun, like an old Southwest machine gun, just spitting out cheese puffs at hundreds per minute. And I was installing a sensor that was measuring the cornmeal that was going into this machine. And I just had this moment of I kind of saw where this road was going. And I just realized I really wasn't going to be proud of creating more cheese puffs for the next, however many years. Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's, that image of the cheese puffs will live with me for sure. Man, but that's very cool. Just to see when you look back, Matt, on how your whole process from being an athlete to seeing how these plants really operated. It really led you down the path, perfectly to get where you are now, which I think that's amazing.
Yeah. All the dots connected when I was looking back on it. There were times where I just thought I was going crazy and maybe some of my friends and family did too. But I always just went back to one of the other first things I did actually, after I got the LLC founded and all that other stuff was, get a hold of this Kombucha Brewers International Association. And they have a Kombucha con that happens out in Long Beach.
That sounds amazing. I just want to go walk around that.
So, and the funny thing was when I got a hold of these guys, they said, "Hey, Matt, that's great that you're interested. We're having our 3rd annual Kombucha Con. And up until this point, it's been only open to commercial brewers. But we now have a brewery and process membership." And so I bought a ticket to Long Beach and I went and I heard, I believe he was the founder or the CEO of Deschutes Brewery, which is a brewery out of Oregon. And, he proclaimed that craft beer and kombucha were essentially on a similar path of taking market share from the large food and beverage companies because people were looking for alternatives. And I just never looked back. It tasted good to me. It solved a personal pain point for myself. And I continued to find others that it was also, assisting and supporting a health conscious lifestyle.
I love it. It really is an amazing alternative. I've gotten so many people hooked on it that used to go buy sodas all the time. And now their fridge is full of kombucha. My brother's in high school and he used to, always drink the sugary drinks. And now when I go home and visit, the whole fridge is full of kombuchas and it makes me so happy. But it really is such an amazing way to switch from, you're used to all the sodas and all of the sweet teas and things like that. It's such an easy switch that tastes good and is also going to benefit you in so many ways.
Yeah. For me, I was hooked from the beginning. And I think, it was also tied into a lot of my research into the microbiome and what a lot of, researchers are now calling a second brain.
Yep.
And so obviously as an athlete, if I could have two brains as opposed to one, I mean, that was going to be a major advantage.
Exactly. And not to mention, I mean, like you were just mentioning the gut and the microbiome, I mean, 80% of your immune system, they now know is, from your gut health. So, we're constantly putting ourselves in situations, whether it is from poor food choices or stress or medications, and all of these things add up, and it really destroys your gut health. So whenever you can add something like kombucha into the mix instead of another sugary sports drink that's going to continuously strip that gut health away, it's obviously the better choice. And I think it's interesting how you have been really pushing it as a sports drink, Matt. I think it's amazing. And I really do believe that's the way to go. I mean, you look at an average sports drink right now, and it's, mainly sugar with, artificial colorings to go with that, and just so many chemicals that aren't serving your body at all. So I think going as a sports drink alternative is just, very, very smart.
Yeah. And I don't even know if it was smart. It's just what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's funny now that it's like, I went to a networking event once, and it was for a company that does like consumer data. And this woman looked at me and was like, Matt, your flavors are so on trend. And I was always just laughing. I was like, I don't even know what's trendy. I'm just making what I like, and other people are digging it.
That's awesome. Something else that I really like too is that you also have I don't know how new it is, Matt, but you also have a recovery kombucha as well that incorporates CBD, or is that new, or is that coming soon, or what's the deal with that?
Totally. So it's available here in the Chicagoland area in growler form. There is one coffee shop that's put it on tap, but that was born out of a lot of research into how trauma is processed by the body. And so whether there's emotional trauma or physical trauma, the same types of hormones are secreted and can go and have an effect on the gut. And so we looked into two compounds, one of them called CBD, which is getting a lot of press lately, but it's essentially a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that can be sourced from the hemp plant, and it has powerful antioxidant and neuroprotective benefits. So for a contact sport athlete, exactly what we need, after a particularly tough session. But also, there's this crazy mad scientist that appeared in our building about 6 months ago. And he came into my brewery and showed me this blue powder that he put into water, and it made this water turn fluorescent blue. And I just looked and I said, what is this stuff? I've been looking for something that was natural and healthy to add some color to our kombucha, something that would be a superfood or, whatever. And he goes, it's a protein that I extract from organic spirulina called phycocyanin. And I started doing research, and lo and behold, this same molecule also serves as an antioxidant and a neuroprotectant. And so we've put together a formulation that utilizes a micro-encapsulated hemp powder. So it's been made water soluble. It's a lot more bioavailable than, say, an oil-based tincture, as well as this protein extracted from spirulina.
That's really cool. And the color is really pretty. I'll give you guys that too. It looks really cool. I'm a fan of the color too.
Yeah, I was blown away. And, now the plan is I just got a shelf life study done, and we're approved to put the product in a 12-ounce can.
Oh, wow.
That we're hopefully going to be making available by the summer.
That's cool. What's the reasoning for the can?
A couple different things. We wanted to take a look at testing it. There's a couple different kombucha brands coming out in cans. It definitely has an increased recyclability compared to glass. It can go places that glass can't, so right. If you're hiking or backpacking, or you're on the beach, or you're, in a yoga studio, sometimes a lot of yoga studios where people are walking around barefoot, they don't always want glass bottles in there.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. When did you say you'll know for sure when that can start being shipped out and good to go?
So I got a 12-month warranty from the the guys who produce the cans. So they took a sample and did a shelf life study. And we've got a little bit of equipment that we need to purchase over the next month or two. And then I'm about 99% complete with the artwork. So we're finalizing the artwork on the packaging, and we'll be moving forward.
Awesome. No, that's super exciting. And I know that one will do, amazing as well. Just kind of looking back on this whole process, Matt, what do you think the biggest struggle of starting the company was for you? Or maybe, and if you can't think of it as a struggle, just something that was the biggest learning curve, or just the hardest thing in general with starting it?
I think sometimes it's just like holding your vision when other people don't see it. And, particularly in the Midwest, kombucha wasn't a thing. I think for me, it was, how do I make this approachable for athletes? Because I was doing a lot of educational, stuff. I was introducing an entirely new concept, not new to me, but new to a lot of people, but it was new to very many people that I was coming into contact with. And holding that vision and, learning to be okay in the unknown, of when you're creating a company, you're creating something that doesn't exist. And there's a lot of unknown, and there's a lot of, asking for help, I think, was a big thing of just swallowing a lot of my ego and reaching out to people who knew a lot more than I did. And, people generally want to help you as long as you're reaching out in a respectful manner.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. And yeah, and that's amazing that you did hold on to that vision, obviously, because you guys are doing amazing. And something we kind of touched on before we started recording, Matt, is you were talking about, again, some of the sustainability aspect of what you guys can really do. So one of those things is, reutilizing the scobies. Did you want to go into the SCOBY leather that you were talking about before we started recording? Because I think it's super interesting. Just and before you get into, just how many ways people use scobies in general. People use them to make certain things. I know people will use them to make dog treats and things like that. They can be used in a lot of different ways, but I think doing something, if you're able to figure it out with SCOBY leather, I think that is huge. I love that.
No, totally. It was literally right before this interview. I was working with an intern that just got hired by another company in our building. And she is a freshman at Columbia University here in Chicago. And she's involved in their fashion and design program. Now, she was specifically interested in finding sustainable materials and came across a bunch of research that people were using scobies to create a type of plant-based leather. And so we started our first experiment today. What we're going to be doing over the next 2 to 6 weeks, we're going to test them at different thicknesses, is creating a 17-inch by 10-inch square SCOBY that we're going to treat into a leather product and potentially either turn into a braided sinew, which would replace a braided leather strap. Or my stretch goal is I'd like to sew it into a SCOBY leather wallet, which has been done. There are some other people who've also completed this. So we're not the first, but it'll be fun to get this done, ourselves with our own hands.
Right. You obviously have plenty of the resources, and no, I think that's amazing, and I'm excited to see how that goes for you guys, because I just think it's super interesting, and especially how just business and everything is moving in that direction. Everything is moving more plant-based, more sustainable, which I'm all for. So I'm just amazed with all of the innovations that people are coming up with. So you'll have to keep me in the loop with that, Matt, as it goes. I want step by step how this is going. I'll be waiting for those messages.
No, totally. We'll be we're going to post some updates on our Instagram over the next couple of weeks, and Perfect. Then provided they turn out, we'll start taking pre-orders for kombucha leather wallets.
Yes, no, I love that. That's awesome. So Matt, I know we just went over a bunch, but is there anything else happening in the future that you just want to put out there and share with people, or just continue to perfect different flavors, work with the SCOBY leather? Is there anything else that you just want to put out there and share with people?
Yeah, for us, we're going to be putting out a protocol that I put together that can assist with symptoms of post-concussion or PTSD, really focused on reducing inflammation and promoting energy flow in the gut and throughout the endocannabinoid system. So that's a protocol that I've been kind of putting together using my own morning routines and my own research that I've been compiling over these years to get it out there for others who potentially have some symptoms.
That's awesome. Are you able to talk about any examples of details of that yet, or not quite yet until you release it?
No, absolutely. So I've got the intention is that I'm going to write blog posts detailing all of the components of the protocol individually. And then if people want to support the project or they got some value from the blog posts, I'm going to make a document, like a Kombucha Fit Volume 1, available with a few extra resources and a few extra notes for purchase.
Perfect. Now all of that sounds amazing. So definitely looking forward to the blog post, because that sounds super interesting. So excited for that. And Matt, what is the best way for people to follow you, follow Kombuchade on social media? That way they can keep up with as you put out new products, as things become available. Obviously, the Kombucha Fit Volume 1, everything that you're working on. What's the best way for people to give you a follow?
Totally. Our website's kombuchade.com. Instagram handle is the same, Kombuchade, so KOMBUCHADE. And then my personal Instagram is just Matt Lancor, no spaces. And we'll be putting out some material over the next couple weeks promoting the launch of this Kombucha Fit protocol.
Awesome. And Matt, just a closing question that I ask every guest. But if you just had one piece of advice for the audience, maybe it's something that's been your biggest takeaway through your whole wellness business journey so far. But if you just had one piece of advice to give, what would it be?
One piece of advice. The hardest part, I think, is just deciding that you want to feel better. And that once you've done that, setting your intentions to feel better and making those daily decisions to do so is all it takes.
No, that's perfect, Matt. And just again, thank you so much for taking time to come on. I loved having you, and just excited to see all of the amazing work that you guys do in the future, because I know all of it's going to be extremely amazing. So just thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me, Dr. Casey. It takes people putting themselves out there and reaching out like you to get this kind of information out there. So I appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you loved my conversation with Matt. He's doing so much positive work, so be sure to give him a follow on social media to keep up with everything that he's been working on. You can find his social media links that we talked about in the episode in the show notes, but you can also find them on my website as well at drcaseyjohnson.com. That's DrKaseyJohnson.com. Click on the Listen tab. Then from there, you'll be able to see all of the past guests that have come on the Unlock Wellness podcast, read a little bit about each guest, and be able to click on their social media links, websites, all of that. So all of Matt's information can be found on my site as well. If you guys loved today's episode with Matt, be sure to jump onto iTunes, subscribe, and write a review. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate all of the feedback and support. Thank you guys so much again for tuning into today's episode. I hope you loved it. I hope it inspires you. And most importantly, I hope you take action.